All right, perfect. All right, so welcome to session 3, our final session together. And this one is going to be on online engagement and wrapping up. This session changed course a little bit after last week's session when we realized we wanted to cover a few more things than we initially had thought. So we hope you'll enjoy taking a little bit of a closer look at how you can interact with and engage with your students in the online environment. All right, so first up, we want to talk a little bit about levels of interaction in an online course. And so the three of them are student to content, student to student, and student to instructor. So these are really the three sort of levels of interaction you should strive for and try to make sure are occurring throughout your online course and your online interactions with your students. So student to content, some examples of that type of interaction would be things like this. So instructional tutorials that you might record or put together as handouts for your students on how to do something where they follow along. Quizzes, specifically quizzes with feedback so that it's more than just sort of answering the questions. They're actually getting feedback after the quiz, whether it's pre-programmed or direct from you. Also guided exploration, where it's kind of like a virtual scavenger hunt. Might be something along those lines, where you have them go out and do things online or search through something or conduct some sort of exercise of doing things as part of their learning activities for the unit. And then there's also reflections. So that's your journaling, things along those lines. Simulations, which would be which you can, to the extent that it's possible online, having them, work with sometimes different tools out there for whether it's STEM or an exercise with like a case study or something like that, where they have to think through something like a real world scenario or a real example of something that they might be learning about, simulating what might happen later on or in a real scenario or in a bigger assignment. And then also, in particular here, interactive lectures. Oh, Rachel shouted out field trips in the chat. That's a very good example too. Virtual field trips. Interactive lectures. So we specifically added interactive to this as a caveat because just sort of a recorded lecture on its own isn't necessarily a student interacting with the content. They're just sort of taking information in. Whereas we'll talk a little bit more about Kaltura later, and some of you may already have some experience with Kaltura, but when you record a lecture with Kaltura or a video, any kind of video, once you go and post it, you can actually embed questions throughout the video. So you could say, 3 minutes in after you've talked about something, it will pop up on the student screen to have them answer a multiple choice question or type in a response to something. The multiple choice answers can be automatically graded. But it's kind of like if you've ever used clickers in your class. It's kind of like the equivalent for online, except I think for the online sort of student in particular, or the person who's watching something asynchronously, this is a little bit more useful because you can get a little more to the point with the question. It's not so much to bridge into a discussion. It's more just to sort of engage them throughout a lecture, especially a lecture that's a little longer, and sort of keep them on their toes, so to speak, throughout it. So it's more of an interaction, less of a sort of taking in information. All right, so let's also talk about multiple means of representation under this sort of student to content umbrella. So multiple means of representation is actually a principle of universal design for learning. So I'm actually gonna hop over to a website now for CAST, who are sort of the authority when it comes to universal design for learning. Just to talk a little bit about when you're putting information up online for your students, or really even in the classroom, this is a multiple means of representation is a great way to consider how to balance the type of content that you're putting out there. And so some examples, if I come down a little bit further here, would be thinking about the ways students are able to take in the information that you're putting out there. So the universal design for learning has sort of a lot of guidelines and sort of branches off of each one. So this page in particular highlights the different pieces of each guideline that sort of align with multiple means of representation. But offering ways to customize the display of information for a student. Some of these they're written sort of intentionally to be broad so that they can be accomplished in a few different ways. But so for these three here, we're offering customizing display of information, alternatives for auditory information, alternatives for visual information. This doesn't mean you have to sort of like program a whole thing where, you know, there's some button that turns a video into a document or something like that. It's just thinking about how you choose what resources go with a particular unit. So if you already have a great handout or a great reading for something, instead of adding another reading or another handout, consider adding a video or recording a video or linking to a podcast episode or a news clip or an interview with somebody that was, you know, done in like a journal or something. So balancing the different types of content that you choose to give to your students so that folks who can, you know, take things in a little better in a different format have more than one way to sort of learn something. Obviously, you can't do that for every single thing that you choose to bring in. If you're teaching a course where they have to read stories, obviously they just need to read the story, but whenever you have the opportunity to offer something in a different format that might appeal to a different type of person, that's always a good idea to do. It also kind of, I don't remember, yeah, I think we talked about accessibility last week. They're all blurring together at this point. So accessibility kind of goes under this umbrella as well, making sure that if you have a video, there's good closed captions, or if you have an audio clip, that there's a transcript. Those are all sort of under the same idea of giving something to people where they can sort of access it in multiple ways. Under our language and symbols guideline, avoid abbreviations, even simple things like, you know, abbreviating chapter to CH or week to WK. Use the full words, full descriptions, even though it may seem obvious to you and many people, it may not to everyone else, especially if, for example, like if a student's at English as a second language, they may see that and think that's some other word. It's just another thing added to the cognitive load for a student. So whenever possible, make sure to fully spell out words. You know, even the simple ones, like I mentioned, for, you know, week and chapter tend to be the big ones, even if you're consistent with it. Clarifying syntax and structure. Again, that kind of goes to having a nice organized, you know, site and keeping things organized consistently. So each unit or each week, just for most people, organized by weeks, organizing the page in a similar way, using similar titles, uploading things and sharing things in formats that they'll be able to recognize from one week and one unit to the next. Rachel mentioned something in the chat. Yes, providing multiple means of content representation helps to compound new knowledge in varied ways. That's a perfect way to say that. And promote understanding across languages. This kind of circles back to the closed captions piece. A lot of people that actually learn English as a second language, they do so, and I'm sure many of you have heard the stories of, like, you know, I would watch American television and watch sitcoms and things like that, and that's how a lot of people learn English, is watching with closed captions on. So you never know when you have a student who one, maybe can't hear, or two, might not speak super fluently the language. So making sure you choose content that has closed captions is always really important for a variety of reasons, for a variety of different people that you may have at that time or you may have in the future. Sort of checking that box and making sure you have closed captions is an important sort of way to achieve that. All right.
Andrew, it's Rachel. I just wanted to chime in too. Throughout our work with this type of information and how to organize content for online, one of the things that we've learned, sorry, you can probably hear my kids little in the background. One of the things we've also learned is research has shown students expel more of their energy delving through materials online than they do actually assembling the knowledge that they're interacting with. So if we can streamline that by avoiding the acronyms, by making things, you know, decoded, so to speak, and organizing it really in a streamlined, efficient way, then students actually get to spend more of their effort actually learning and extracting what they need to from the materials you're providing. So that's why that's such a big deal.
Yep, perfectly said, exactly. All right, so moving on from student to content, let's talk a little about student to student. So how might that be achieved? So a big one is group work, just like it is in the face-to-face classroom. In online courses, it can be just as effective and just as doable. There's a lot of tools and a lot of strategies and a lot of flavors of ways you can use things. So it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to assigning students to work in groups online. But we encourage you to sort of, if you already have group activities that you've done, look at how those can be adapted and look at, based on some of the stuff we've learned in the last few sessions and some tools we've shown to you and another tool I'll show you in a little while, how might those connect or how might those be able to be used? And I'll mention too, and just sort of throughout this, every time you see something that we recommend or are talking about, if you have some examples or if you have a course or an activity that you want to try out, or you're not sure what tools to use, you can always reach out to us and we'll go through the activity and see what might be a good fit. But group work can definitely work online, and it can be more sophisticated projects like things that take multiple weeks and they build toward a presentation or a final paper or something, or it can even be something simple like a weekly discussion or just a peer review. Again, there are all sort of similar examples on here on this slide, but there's a lot of ways to make students work together in just about any discipline we've seen them. There's opportunities to make that happen because especially in an online course, it's easier for students to sort of fall into the back and feel like they're just kind of isolated and taking the course alone. But learning is a social experience, or it's most effective when it's a social experience for most people. And so even though it may be asynchronous, there are ways, and it should be sort of strived for, to have interaction points between the students throughout the course. It's not always possible to do it every week, but you should try to make it happen and let them make the same connections in an online course that they might have been able to make in a face-to-face course, trying to get to that point where they have those interactions. Peer instruction is another great way to sort of come toward that, and some people have taken that as sort of integrating it with the discussion feature, where you let a group or students, individually depending on the size of the class, dictate the discussion prompt for a week. So like they're preparing the week ahead as an assignment for the prior week, and they sort of facilitate the discussion and they do the replying. And as that's, sort of a way where they have to provide some materials and things like that. So I know it tends to be higher level, 300, 400 level classes that can make that happen, but peer instruction can absolutely be done just as effectively online as it is face-to-face. As far as discussion strategies, there's always the sort of traditional, you put up a prompt with a couple of questions, and then they all go and reply to that prompt and then also to each other. And that works. You'll find that they get a little tired of that though, and you might get a little tired of it as well. But you can mix it up with role-playing activities where you can assign, split them down the middle. Sometimes it's easiest to just do it by last name and say if your last name starts with A through J, you're on this side of the argument. If you're on, JKL, not JKK. If your last name's K through Z, you're on the other side, or divide them up however you want to let them do role plays. Similarly, you can do the same thing with something like a debate. Again, whatever works depending on your classroom. I've seen some fun history ones where they had to role play as historical figures or a political party of the time. And they sort of have to take the stance of someone outside of themselves. And it's interesting to see where they go with it. Especially online where you have full participation. When you do an online discussion, the big difference is that they all are going to participate. In a classroom, you may hear from 5 or 6 people. In a bigger class, the ratio might be even smaller than in your 30-seaters. But when you do an online discussion, this is also something to be mindful of as you think about what fall classes might go online. It's not just going to be 5 or 6 people. You're going to hear from every single student their take on it. So 100-student classes, discussions are a little trickier than in your 30-seaters, but they can certainly be as effective in different ways that you can sort of make students come at it. There's also live meetings, whether it's hosted by you or you allow, and it's possible through my courses to have them sort of meet together online if you want to give the groups the space to do that. Sometimes they'll expect a tool from you, sometimes they'll just text each other and figure out a best way for them to communicate. But being able to, encourage that and then know that can be facilitated through an online course, that students can work together. Realistically, that probably doesn't work great for groups that are bigger than 3 or 4, just in terms of getting them all together in one place. But encouraging them to meet online, to work, especially like working on bigger projects and even in sort of a more traditional lecture, something like this, where you can break them up into breakout rooms during a meeting, a Zoom meeting, to have them discuss in smaller groups. It gives those opportunities for that to work. And then lastly, peer review. I kind of mentioned it earlier, and none of these sort of exist in a vacuum. You can do group work, role plays, you can do group work and live meetings. So these aren't individual recommendations. You can mix these up, and there's certainly a much more you could pick from that. But peer reviews, just as effective online, where you can have students post. If it's a written sort of deliverable, have them post those. Everyone can read each other's. Some people will do peer review groups, which can be kind of nice, especially if you have sort of regular work that they have to do throughout the semester, where you could say every week you get a group of 3 different people. You have to post your work and then respond to each other. So it's a little bit more intimate, where they work with 3 people a week as opposed to 30 people in a whole class, or however many people in a whole class. But then it can also be a little bit of a different type of project, and we'll talk about it next, where you could have them record presentations, and then everybody can watch each other's presentations, and then respond to each other or look at other people's work, other than just written and sort of critique it, and do that peer review in that sort of other format than just looking at each other's papers through a discussion, which sort of leads me here into VoiceThread, where there are a few different types of activities that I want to talk about, and I'll show you. So first is audio-video discussions. So this one's pretty much the most common, and we've been talking about these for a while, where the idea of the tool, and I'll show these off in a little bit after I give some explanation, is that students come in and they make their comments through audio or video as opposed to text, and they make them in response to something that you put forward. So similar idea where you could put questions. We like these especially for introductions activities, where the students come in and they introduce themselves with an audio or video comment, so you get to hear them talk about themselves or introduce themselves, where they can listen to what other people have posted and then reply to their peers, all with audio and video. So that's sort of the discussion branch of VoiceThread. But it can also be used for 2 other types of activities that I'll talk about now. And one is share and comment activities, and that's just sort of a term I've made up to describe them, where if you think about like a PowerPoint presentation like this, right? Essentially everybody can contribute a slide or a piece of content, and then talk about why they've contributed that piece. And then everybody can sort of scroll through one slide at a time, and listen to what everyone else has contributed, look at what they've contributed, and respond to them. So that could be something straightforward like, create a digital poster board, where they make a slide in PowerPoint and contribute that. There's classes where they've contributed a video that they've recorded. Sometimes they just record themselves on the fly and everyone looks at whatever they have recorded. But the big difference here, or the main focus of this type of an activity, is that everyone's bringing something to the table, some piece of content. They're all sort of contributing and building this class-wide presentation together. Then they're talking about why they chose it, hearing why other people chose and contributed whatever they contributed, and explaining the why they've chosen something as opposed to responding to whatever you've said. And then there's also presentations. With or without peer review, students can use VoiceThread, and you can sort of set it up to work for them, where they can create a presentation where it's got multiple, I say slides, but VoiceThread kind of defines slide a little differently. It's just the page of the thing you're looking at. So it might be you look at a document, and then you look at a video, and then you look at an image. It just sort of puts them in a sequence, and slides really the sort of general terminology for moving between those things. But it allows students to sort of do that presentation that would have otherwise happened in class online, and then they can be posted in my courses or shared and accessed by other students in my courses, to look at and respond to and watch back, similar to how they might have done it in a classroom. So there is sort of they can just put together a bunch of slides and then talk over them, but they could also, just as an example, curate an exhibit where they pull together some images, or they pull in, a mixed media of, pull in some images and videos and this and that and record something else. VoiceThread will really take whatever they've got, documents, slides, PDFs, videos, audio clips, stuff from YouTube, and they can put it into a sequence and add their sort of thought process and narration over it, to sort of create a presentation out of that. So now if I switch over to here, I prepared some VoiceThreads to just show everybody. lots of examples in my site now. All right, so here's an example of a class discussion. So if I click on here, I'm looking at it from the instructor point of view to give you a sort of top level idea of how this can work. So here as the instructor, there's the ability to grade. Everything you do in VoiceThread can be graded. But if I click in here, it's going to show you how the VoiceThread actually works. So the way it shows up to them is just like this, where you as the instructor put something in the middle here as a prompt with the directions. So I just took this into PowerPoint and I just put the directions as bullets, nothing fancy. But you can upload a Word document, you could just record yourself saying something and have that be the middle thing, but in a discussion, something has to be the center focus. And then on the left here, the students come in and they make their comments. So these are all just me talking to myself because this is the example. But here I can see this demo user person made a comment. So if I click on it, it plays. Hello, here's what I think about this. And then other people came in and replied to me underneath it. So here I can see me as the instructor, I replied to them privately. So this is sort of a way for you to give feedback in a way that's in the context of the discussion that they had, but privately so that only the person you're replying to can see it. And it has this itty bitty little lock on it so that you know it's private. But then this is just another student who replied to that person. And they thread them where this is like a square comment, and then the circles are the replies underneath. And then if somebody else made a new comment, it would appear as a square onto here. Usually it shows people's initials. I added a little picture, but this is the idea of how a VoiceThread discussion can work. You put a prompt in the middle, whether it's you speaking or you put together a slide or a document, and then the students come in and they add their comments along the bottom here that then show up along the left. I'll mention too, they can do audio or video comments using their camera and their microphone if they have one. But even for the lowest tech students who's hitting a wall or doesn't have a microphone, there's this telephone option that's fantastic where they can type in their phone number and then it will call them toll free. They don't have to pay anything. And then it'll sort of give them a, record at the beep. And then when it beeps, it starts recording whatever they said. And when they hang up, it takes that audio and it posts it here under their initials as a comment. So even the lowest tech person can still participate and reply and do this sort of an audio discussion. So now let's jump back and look at a share and comment activity. So click on this one. You'll start to notice it's the same type of buttons, just sort of used in a different way. So this is the same idea here. I came in and I put this slide together with instructions on how to participate. But then here in the bottom right corner, there's a little button to move from one slide to the next. This is what I was talking about with that sort of multiple slides idea. So if I click here, it brings up this slide. So this student too contributed a picture of Mona Lisa, and then they used an audio comment to talk about why they chose it. So you could think about, listen to, I pulled in this picture of such and such art because this was my favorite one this semester, or whatever it might be. So again, it could be they contribute a picture, an image, a video, something from YouTube, a slide that they make, a Word document that they make. But the idea would be that everybody contributes one piece of this presentation and everyone's able to sort of scroll left and right through it to look at what they've contributed, hear why they chose it, and then make their own comment in response to whatever that person's contributed. So it's like that collective sort of class presentation. We started doing these with VoiceThread. There haven't been as many, but picked up a lot of steam over the spring. So at the second half of spring semester, and students responded really well to it and have really enjoyed this particular type of activity, which is why I wanted to make sure it was highlighted. And technologically, it's not too difficult from a jump from that to the discussion to this, where the students just click this little button right here, and they just hit the plus button to add something, so they can pull in that image, pull in the video, whatever it might be, from their computer that they need to contribute. But it sort of takes that discussion and kicks it up a notch, where they have to actually contribute something beyond just responding. So they get a little bit more invested when they've actually had to put something on the line and contribute something of their own. All right, so now let's look at presentations. So if I click on this link, this is going to show what this looks like, where this is what it would look like if students all came in and contributed their presentations to a central place. So you and the students would come in and look at this page and see you know, I don't have student presentations here. I just have a bajillion voice threads that are just my own. But it would come in here and you would be able to see, oh, look, here's Andrew's presentation, here's Rachel's presentation, here's Tracy's presentation. And then you can click play to watch it.
Hi.
And this is Kermit. This is just the example one that I did. And then they're able to use the same old buttons to comment back to each other. And so here they would be able to respond and listen to whatever the person had posted. If it was multiple slides or multiple things, they could move through and look at the other slides that the person posted. But the main idea here is that they're able to come in and just look at what everyone's submitted as a presentation and recorded. So if they would have otherwise given these in the face-to-face classroom, it's kind of that same thing on like presentation day. You know, that's the due date. Everybody comes in and looks at what everyone's presentations have been, reply to each other, and you can get a similar dialogue going there as you would have in the classroom. Let's see. I noticed something in the chat that I want to talk about. Are there examples of how students can be creative beyond slides and dialogue for voice-thread presentation? So it's tricky. I worked with, in particular, I worked on a voice-thread assignment with someone in CVPA over the second half of spring. And you kind of have a mix of students who, some of them were really comfortable and they like pulled out their phones, recorded stuff, edited the video. It was like, blew our minds. And then there's the others on the other end of the technical spectrum who are a little more comfortable with just sort of like making the slide or making a document and uploading that. So when you make these sort of activities where they contribute something, I usually encourage folks to establish a baseline. So like the minimum here would be to sort of create the slide, put this on it, meet this criteria, but then add a statement of like, if you'd like to go beyond that, you can totally go beyond that and record something or do something like that, but sort of giving them a safe place to work in where we can provide tutorials and sort of support for them to accomplish something that's still a good solid presentation or a submission, but then opening the door for the people who are a little more comfortable experimenting with some recording and other stuff like that to be able to do so if they want to. Yeah, and after the Rachel's pasting the tutorials in the chat, but after the presentation, we'll send out the link. And I actually, on the VoiceThread page that she's sending, there's a video at the top of the page that actually goes through all of these different types of VoiceThread activities that you can do. It's like a 5-minute video. It's like 5 VoiceThread activities in 5 minutes. So all the different types that you can set up. And then that same page has tutorials on how to set all of these up. And then it also has tutorials for the students on how to participate. So we encourage you to do sort of follow all 3, like watch the VoiceThread activities video to see which one you want to do, use the tutorial for the instructor on how to set up that type of activity, and then when you put your directions together, grab one of the videos from that page for students on how to participate in that type of activity so that when they hit it, they'll have a tutorial right there that shows them exactly what to do. All right, so that's VoiceThread. It's a personal favorite. If you have an idea for an activity, I encourage you to give it a try with VoiceThread. And of course, if you have any questions along the way, you can always let us know, and we'll get on Zoom with you or talk to you through email and help you set it up. All right, so now let's talk a little about student to instructor. So in an online class, it's mostly going to be asynchronous, but here are some of those things that you can do to make sure you're present in the class and in their learning. Offering regular feedback, typically at least on a weekly-ish basis. They're getting some feedback directly from you, whether it's from a small writing assignment or responses to essay questions or discussion grades, something that they're getting feedback from you on their learning to help guide them. You can also be present in the online discussions. The instructor's role should be pretty minimal. You should try to let them speak among themselves as much as possible, but where you see opportunities to sort of pull more out of them or redirect them or correct something that needs to be corrected, you can jump in there to do that throughout the discussion actually happening. You can also do sort of post-discussion recaps, some instructors will do, where after the discussion's over, as part of your weekly announcement or something, you can sort of post a recap of everything talked about in the discussion, or as a way to sort of put a period on it and also insert your thoughts on it. Which kind of leads into communicating regularly. Do a few announcements every week through my courses, sending out to the class about new content you've released, give them a heads up that you just did some grading, just that stuff you would usually say to them at the beginning of a face-to-face class, you can use the announcements tool to do that. You can also host office hours online through a tool like Zoom, just like this, where students can pop in during hours that you set to meet with you, or they can do a scheduled one-on-one with you if they needed to through Zoom. Virtual office hours work a little bit differently than on-ground office hours, where you have to let them know how to access you during them. So let them know, there's a link in my courses where you can access me during these hours. You'll find that if you're teaching a fully online class, the students aren't as available during the day as face-to-face students would be. So, you might do like 5 or 6 o'clock at night on a weekday, maybe even a weekend office hour here or there, to sort of make it more available to their schedule. Since most of them, for fully online classes at least, most of those students are working during the day, or they're home with children during the day and things are chaotic and they can't get on Zoom with you. So evening office hours are better, or tend to be better when you're teaching fully online students in fully online classes. Of course, answering questions, you can set up, and we encourage folks to set up and ask questions here discussion forum in their My Courses site, where students can post questions. All students in the class can see those questions and you can reply to them there. And what's nice is that as the weeks go by, you have one central forum where questions are already answered, posted and answered rather, so that if one student has a question and goes to get it, to ask it, the answer may already be sitting there. So it's just a place to be able to get answers for questions for students, but it also can help alleviate your inbox as well, so that students aren't all flooding into the inbox in this sort of a controlled space within each course for all those questions to live and be answered. I see some people relating to home that's chaotic with children in the chat. Yes, the chat will be saved, and when we send out the follow-up link, not only do we post the recording, but we post the whole transcript of the chat. So you'll get this whole experience in your inbox a little later this afternoon. And then again, student to instructor live meetings like Zoom, another opportunity for that to happen. Zoom doesn't only have to be used for lectures. You can use it to just sort of host a question and answer day with the students. You can use it to do sort of like if final project's coming up, you can host a Zoom day and just say, hey, everybody can drop in. We'll specifically be talking about, the final project ideas, or if anybody needs research help, you can theme the meetings potentially to sort of draw them in a little differently. But live meetings are a great tool. If you're teaching face-to-face, if you're teaching fully online, getting an entire fully online class together is near impossible because everyone's got a different schedule. But it'll depend to how fall courses iron out whether or not they'll have scheduled set times when students sign up. So that all is TBD. But as far as teaching fully online, live meetings are great, but you want to theme them to get them to come. So it's not just the lecture. It's like, oh, it's specific help to this or that. I'll mention too, that we have sort of got a strategy for encouraging students to come to live meetings in fully online classes when possible, where if it is an asynchronous fully online course, you can say, oh, we're going to have a live meeting 2 or 3 weeks from now on a Monday, right? You give them plenty of notice. And then if students can't make it, they have to do sort of an alternative. Like for the most part, it's write a 1-page summary of it and submit it, and you get the same credit as everybody who attended to watch the recording. What that'll do is it motivates them to not want to write that 1-page paper, so they'll rearrange their schedule to be there. But then for those who don't, the recording is available to them. Even though it's now just sort of a passive experience of watching it, at least they got the information there when they could, and they were able to earn the credit like everybody else for coming. All right, next slide. So humanizing your course. So this is going to sort of in particular shout out a tool called Kaltura. Some of you may already know what it means or what it is, but basically it's a tool that can be used to record what's going on your computer or your camera on your phone or your tablet, and then easily post it into your My Courses sites for students to get at. So in particular, a good use for humanizing your course and using recordings is first at the beginning of the course having a course site tour where Kaltura is recording whatever's going on your computer screen as well as your voice, and you're clicking through your My Courses site, explaining how things are organized, pointing out particular areas that you want to make sure students go to. It's a sort of open sort of season on any, record anything you want. Go to the library databases, go to websites that you want to. It'll record anything on your computer at all. You can also use it on a sort of per unit or per week, which most people use week, to just introduce the unit, talk about what's going on. It's a great tool to sort of fill in the same stuff you would have said at the beginning of a class, not only on the first day, but on sort of the first day of every subsequent unit, where you want to talk a little bit about the topic, but it's not really a lecture. It's just, here's what we're doing, here's the assignments coming up. For the students to be able to hear it from you and actually see you if possible, it just makes them feel more connected to the class and more like they're in a class with people, with an instructor guiding them who's present in their learning. You can also use it, of course, to deliver new information and do something like a lecture where you go through slides or you go through documents or whatever it might be. So it's certainly a tool that a lot of people use to record lectures. And then it can also be used, you know, because it just works on recording a screen. If you have a tablet or an iPad or one of the laptops that folds back and you can write on, it can be used to record a virtual whiteboard, where if you want to do out math problems and actually scribble and write, it can capture all of you speaking and doing the math out if you want to be able to post examples for your students, which I highly recommend for any sort of math or STEM work, so that students can actually see it being solved. Kind of like if you've ever looked at math videos on Khan Academy, you can do your own Khan Academy videos with Kaltura. But this sort of on the theme of how to record a video, do it like you would in the classroom. Say hello to everyone, how's, you know, hi, good morning. Try to be personable so that it's not just like robo teacher, you know, hits the button and starts speaking. Speak to them just like you would in the classroom. And it's real, for the most part, there is some editing in here, but we encourage you to just sort of record through. You know, you'll kind of have to numb the sting of hearing yourself speak and watching yourself back. Just record through. If you were in the classroom and you had an or stumbled or something, you would just keep going, and they know that, and they're used to that. So just do your one and dones with Kaltura. If you know, the editing is there if you really needed to cut something out of the middle, but for the most part, just go through. Don't feel too much pressure, because for them, it's incredibly valuable to hear exactly what you want from your mouth, and to hear it from you, who is the subject matter expert. You are the class, not the book, not the content, you. So this is the tool that can be used to sort of reach them at the way that they need you. And sort of on that topic, there's also an app for phones and tablets. So not only can it be installed on your laptop, so if you want, you can install it on your device. And I know people in like CVPA or in some of the labs will just take it to whatever they need to do and record themselves with the selfie camera doing whatever the task might have been, so that they can post that video online for the students. Or someone will just use the video camera to just quickly open it up, record a hi everyone, how's it going, talk straight to camera, give them an update, make a quick announcement, 2 minutes, and post that online for the students. Having them sort of in your pocket, I think especially this fall, if you're gonna be on campus, go out to like the Campanile and like record yourself talking and make the students feel connected to the campus, you know, especially if some won't be there. It sort of pulls them into the class and makes them feel like they're part of the campus and the university, when you're able to sort of bring them in, you know, and go talk out on the quad for a little while, as opposed to just sort of a white wall or in your office or something. So building on what we mentioned about the course site tour video, every online course should have a course welcome page. And this should be that first day of class stuff, where you can introduce yourself, talk about important course policies, list your virtual office hours, post your syllabus, give an overview of what the course is about, what are the big projects, your contact information. It's all that stuff you would usually talk about on the first day of class. That is sort of the need to know. It's like your first lesson, really, that lives over in this welcome that students can refer back to throughout the semester. And it can be a mix of written stuff. You can record some things, and you know, sort of put as much into there as you might, as they would need to know for that first day of class. It's just as important for the online course to kick off with the same information. Next up, revisit your syllabus. So we started this whole series with, you know, work on your syllabus and build from there, but now you kind of have to revisit and update it. So based on what changes you've made and the fact that you might be teaching fully online, make sure you've got your due dates in there all up to date, especially indicating the new assignments if you've chosen different tools or different ways to do them. any important milestones for projects and things like that. If you've chosen to have any live meetings, make sure that those are really clear in your course schedule. And we really kind of see it as when you're teaching an online course, you don't have a schedule, you have a calendar. And so it's, especially if you're teaching blended, where it's a mix of face-to-face and online, you need a calendar with like due dates, when we're meeting, where we're meeting, you know, when something's supposed to be due, when this milestone is going to happen for like making sure a group project's done. Sort of plotting out your course calendar as far out as possible is really important. And then also the language in your syllabus should reflect online participation if you're teaching fully online. So, you know, showing up to class late wouldn't be a thing. Pulling out those pieces of your syllabus and rephrasing them to make sure that they reflect online world, not face-to-face world if you're teaching fully online. Just sort of reading through it and making sure that those references and that little bit of language reflects the class that they're actually in. Even if it's been in the syllabus a million years, which is just life, you know, your syllabus doesn't change too much. It's important to scan through and make sure that it speaks to the student you have in the class that you have then. We'll also shout out, we have a template syllabus that if anybody would like to use, you're welcome to. It's got all the UMass Dartmouth policies in it, linked out. It's fully accessible with headings and formatting and all that kind of stuff. And it's really fill in the blank where you can put in your own descriptions, your own syllabus, your own schedule, your own contact information. But what's nice is it's sort of structured and pre-built already for you with all the needed stuff. We'll share this out with the resources that we'll post after this, but it's all posted out there. And the syllabus is a great way to start, especially if it's a new course, with sort of fill in the blank style, as opposed to sort of working with the document you've already got. This one's accessible and ready to go. So now let's talk about homework, everyone's favorite part. So we want, even though this is the last session, this is sort of where you should go from here. So build a course welcome page, like we talked about, sort of that first day of class page, and then try out some humanizing elements. Can you find and identify all 3 levels of interaction throughout your course? If not, it might help guide your work in your online course and help sort of shape what you might put some more work into, whether it's adding some interactivity to the content or adding in another opportunity for students to work together. Sort of viewing it through the lens of those 3 levels of interaction can help balance out the experience for your students. We also encourage try out recording something with Kaltura. We have Kaltura workshops all summer if you want to sort of try your first one out in a little more of a safe place with somebody doing it in a workshop. But get Kaltura installed and give it a try. Try recording a course tour or do a lecture or something like that. Having that installed on your computer or on your phone is just great. You know, once it's installed, it's just a red record button, but you can hit at any time, record something, and easily post it online for your students. And then lastly, update your syllabus to reflect all of your new online elements. All right, so we've got about 15 minutes left. So since this is our last day together, I'm gonna open up the ability for people to unmute themselves. And I was gonna open up for chat. So if you want to talk about anything we talked about today or in the past several sessions or things you're thinking about, now's the chance. Just raise your hand. If you look along the bottom, there'll be a participation button. And then if you click on participation over on the right, you should be able to raise your hand. And we would love to hear from anybody.
Thanks, Rachel. Robert, so just to kind of finish up or kind of continue what we were talking about in the chat, if folks have been paying attention, I know poor Andrew's been talking, so he doesn't get a lot of reading time while this goes on. Somewhere along the lines of online learning, someone came up with a crazy rule that everybody seems to adopt is, you know, discussions always have to be post once, reply to 2 friends. It's not written in stone anywhere, so we always encourage folks to take a look at what the goal is for the conversation or what the discussion needs to be. For example, what I was saying before, are you really trying to encourage that back and forth conversation because you're prepping for a simulation like a debate and you really need the exercise to kind of build those skills of back and forth and using data and using information to kind of support their arguments? And then Jay's example was, you know, it's very reading heavy in his course, so he needs to allot them time to read, formulate probably a lengthier response, and then post and have that back and forth. We also have some other folks that the whole goal of the discussion is really critique based. So if they're producing a written work or a picture of something that they post, or a video clip or something, some product, a multimedia project, what have you, students post that to the discussion forum, and then the whole discussion happens on a given day, or within a range of 2 to 3 days, because it's critique heavy and they're offering constructive feedback. So I think you need to look at what you're trying to achieve. And then maybe, since your goal is really to get them to build some debate skills, I would suggest building in some concrete due dates. Like, if it's open within a given week, say Monday through Sunday, right? Maybe have them, their first post is due day 1 to 2, then first replies are day 2 to 4, 3 to 5. And then there has to be a second reply in there, and then a final response. So you can build in a couple more due dates for them. And I think that will get them to kind of add in their posts and their responses more frequent, and then also quicker. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Yeah, there's that myth Rachel just mentioned of like post once, reply twice. That was sort of from the original days of online learning in like the early mid 2000s. Yeah, it works. It does have its merits and it works sometimes, but if you've done an online course or an online discussion with that, it gets boring quick. So as much as you can, try to mix up the style of, having the sort of share and comment discussions, having role plays, debates, switching it up, doing small group discussions, whenever you can, is going to make that a more rewarding and fruitful experience for them participating in the activity, but also for you grading it. You don't want to read 30 identical responses. I'll mention too, in the text discussions, you can actually have it so that you can put it in what's called post-first mode, where students aren't able to read what other people have posted until they've made their initial post. So if you do a post once, reply twice type discussion, we highly encourage you to enable that setting, that post-first mode. But yeah, doing 15 of those throughout a semester. It's not as interesting. It becomes more of a writing exercise than it does an exercise in sort of working back and forth with other students. So switching up your discussion strategy is a good idea.
So I couldn't respond right away because I was hunting for the mute, but I found it. So what I normally do in my face-to-face classes is I have them respond to the assigned readings in advance of every class, right? So twice a week or 3 times a week. And that really gets them to do the reading without making it too overwhelming. So, going into the fully online environment, I'll be on a 14-week schedule with this class and presumably the other ones as well. And so I'm kind of torn between, having them read everything for the whole week and then have a discussion, or having a discussion that's just about the first thing and then they do the second and third things on their own. And that can feed into the subsequent parts of the discussion if they want. What's your advice?
Yeah, I see what you mean. So sort of in your face-to-face class, having them do things prior to class so they kind of come fully loaded, whereas the workflow for an online class tends to be, read, watch, do all this stuff, then do an activity, sort of with everything under their belt. I think you could be creative with how you deliver the activities. So maybe the readings for the following week the readings that you do in a week are sort of from the week before. So like if you assign the readings as like the last activity of, so for example, if you have like week 2 and week 3, at the end of week 2, your last assignment is to do the readings for week 3 so that they hit the ground running with week 3 or a certain amount of readings. So that week 3, there's a specific prompt right at the beginning that they have to do. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll do it in that order, but it's sort of simulating that, do it beforehand, do it as this last sort of piece of the week before, or as the class before, for what's coming up. So you start with an activity as opposed to starting with a reading or starting with watching something. Does that sound like it might be a match?
Well, it's definitely thinking outside the box. I'm just worried about overwhelm. The class that I'm thinking of is pretty information intensive. And I'm just worried about overwhelming them with too much in one reading session, if you will.
I get that. We can look at it. I mean, reach out to Rachel or I, and we'd be happy to sort of do a one-on-one and see what we can figure out, especially with sort of delivering the content. There's also ways we can sort of program things to open at certain times, like throughout a week, maybe gate, or we could figure out maybe a creative way with how content releases to sort of keep them at certain ideas. So I feel like we could figure out something.
Sounds good, thanks.
Yeah. Jay, your hands up?
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in, Rob, because I think you raised an important concern, and I know it was a challenge for me when I taught my first online course, which happened to be reading heavy as a literature course. And I suppose I want my cake and I want to eat it too, in the sense that I want to have the back and forth and give and take between students. I want them to get in the habit of not only reading the course material, but also reading each other's posts critically, and then responding to them critically. But in the literature course, I also want to work on their analytical writing and sort of evidence-based, thesis-driven writing. So I did have to make the decision that for my course and my learning outcomes, the latter was primary, that getting the students to engage with the readings, to make an argument rather than just an opinion piece, and then to support that argument with evidence and analysis from the text, and then to do that in response to one of their peers, that was the goal, and that the interaction would happen as a result. But what I found was that students really did need time to complete the reading, lest I actually foster a bad habit of, kind of surface reading or reading that wasn't deep and slow and engaged. So this might not be a popular position, but I actually decided to go from 2 discussion posts and response rounds a week to 1, and try to emphasize the quality over the quantity, and to give them sort of days 1, 2, and 3 to read, to have them take a quiz on day 3 to kind of get, test their comprehension of the reading, to make the first discussion post due day 4, and then the response to classmate due day 6. And then sometimes what I do for feedback is that I'll use a rubric to kind of diagnose kind of the mechanics of the writing and the argument. But then for the content-based issues, I'll just record a 3-minute Kaltura piece and respond to the whole class and say, these are some of the common themes, these are some of the common threads that came up in this discussion. That's the model that I tend to rely on. But I also think, as Andrew was saying, it's a good idea to try to, every discussion board doesn't have to follow the same set of requirements, and every discussion board doesn't have to unfold the same way. I guess what I'm saying is I've learned to trust my students a little bit to interact with each other, and I can see that that interaction is taking place, even if I'm not responding to every single post every single time. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's very helpful, thanks.
Yeah, that's really well put. Not every student-to-student interaction needs to be the same. And if you've taken a fully online class where you've done sort of the routine discussion, you kind of get into a mode of like, okay, so somebody told this instructor that we have to work together to be good at online. To be in a good online class, we have to work together over and over and over. And that's not necessarily true. That's not the only way you can measure students' learning, but it is a way to connect them to the class. So you build in as many opportunities as you can, but it should never come at the expense of like, I have to have them interact, so I'm gonna do it this way. If your outcomes, your objectives take you in a certain direction or a certain type of activity that's not a student-to-student activity or discussion, that's totally okay. It's just making sure that throughout the class, there's opportunities for everything, for them to work on their own, to work with each other, to interact with you. It's a balance. And the first time you teach an online class, it may be totally imbalanced, and you'll learn from it, but trying to keep those 3 levels of interaction in mind. And as you teach online and you try out some of the tools and learn what they can do and what does work and what doesn't work well, that's another tricky thing, is every discipline, certain strategies work better than others. So we'll tell you, oh, this will work, and then you'll do it and you'll be like, well, really only one of these needed to happen a week. It's from experience. It's just like your face-to-face teaching, you start out fresh with a brand new class, you try an activity, it falls flat. The next semester you make a tweak, it works much better. It's the same with online. It's the same sort of teacher struggles that you'll find face-to-face, except sometimes it's a little more intimidating because of the tech, the learning new tech at the same time, but that's what we're here for. We're helped to sort of connect and give you a little faith in how things can work. All right, anything else anybody would like to share?
I can also add to what Andrew's saying, and Jackie might be able to attest to this, I'm not sure. But we've always told folks, you know, you're probably not going to be happy with your online course until the third run of it, because it is that revision and editing process to kind of fine tune things as you kind of deliver them, and then you get student feedback and you see how it went, and then you see how the course kind of unfolds. So, you know, try to be patient, try to just kind of make notes as your first semester or first session unfolds, and then see where you can kind of tweak and adjust things to kind of get more towards the target that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think so. I can chime in there, Rachel. Thanks. I think that you're right. You don't know the first time how it's going to happen. I mean, you guys helped me when I first put the class together to come up with some interesting ideas to make it interactive and also to make it a little bit some variation. One of the things that I do, I think this came up in one of other Andrew's comments, maybe in another session, but I actually I'm teaching my graduate class this summer, and I have 3 different units, and I actually rotate the students in their discussion groups for each of the units. So they actually get to talk to everybody in the class at some point. And first of all, it varies the group. So if you have a group that's not, you know, that might be more of a dud because there's not a lot going on, it changes up in a couple weeks. And they also seem to really appreciate that because they get to talk to everybody.
Yeah, that's a great strategy for, especially in a smaller, not smaller class, but like in a 100-seater, it's tougher, but in the traditional size, letting them have a bunch of smaller, in-depth, more intimate discussions as opposed to a bunch of big ones with the whole class. It's a very different experience for the students, but it's the same tools, same buttons, just used in an ever so slightly different way to give them a very different experience. All right. Anybody else want to share anything? No?
I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to both of you. It was a big help. I have so much to learn.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, we were so happy to host these sessions. We hope there was something for everybody here, but we try to give as much sort of neutral information as possible in these types of workshops. But you know, every instructor who teaches online will say, you know, we give you sort of a base to work with, and then we can help you sort of pivot off into a direction that works specifically not only for your discipline but for the course you're teaching, because you know every strategy sort of needs to be customized to work for whatever course. So there's sort of that individual stuff that we're also happy to work with. So you can always feel free to reach out to Rachel or I after these sessions, and we're always happy to meet and just have brainstorming sessions, or if you have a tool in mind or a strategy or an activity you want to talk about, we're more than happy to meet and talk about how things can be done and brainstorm and educational stuff. It's our favorite thing to do. All right, so unless anybody has any last comments, I think we can wrap up.
Thank you guys for this series. It's been very, very helpful for those of us who are utterly terrified at the moment.
There's nothing to be afraid of. I mean, there are things to be afraid of, but we'll just put those, we'll just squash them right down and work through it together. So thank you.
All right, thanks so much for coming. We'll wrap up. Bye, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye, have a great week.